I've been asked 100 times why I went up there alone. Some people expect a poetic answer, to find myself, to test my limits, all that packaged adventure brochure crap. The truth is uglier. I didn't want anyone slowing me down. It was late November, and I was 48 years old. Beartooth Mountains, Montana, high country, high stakes, elk season's last gasp. I'd hunted the edges before, never pushed this deep. My son had asked to come along, 15 years old, with that restless energy that makes you want to say yes, just to see him out there. I told him, next time, but deep down, I wanted the quiet for myself, wanted the bragging rights, wanted the solitude that makes you feel like the world's a challenge, not a crowd. That morning, the cold was a living thing, dry, sharp, chewing on the inside of my nose when I breathed. Snow crusted over the branches, needle tips frozen like glass shards. The sky was pale blue at sunrise, darkening toward the west. A hint of weather brewing, but nothing to scare a man who'd seen worse. I'd prepped like I always did. Bivy sack and down sleeping bag. Small stove, fuel canister, freeze-dried meals, jerky, coffee, rifle and 20 rounds, laminated topo map, compass, GPS with spare batteries, medical kit with quick clot, gauze, a tourniquet I never thought I'd need, bright orange signal panel, whistle, headlamp. Everything weighed about 45 pounds, enough to make every step count. By mid-morning, I was following fresh tracks, hoof prints clean in the snow, steam and scat not 20 minutes old. The forest was quiet except for my boots, crunching through the crust. Each breath hung in the air before shattering into frost dust. The land funneled me into a narrowing draw, spruce crowding overhead, the ground sloping upward in steps. I moved slow, like my father taught me. Roll the foot, eyes scanning for sign, always reading the wind. By noon, clouds thickened over the ridgeline, low, gray, fast moving. The wind picked up, slipping icy fingers down my collar. The smart move would have been to set camp early, but the trail was hot. I told myself I'd push to the next ridge before stopping. That's the thing about the mountains. They don't care about your plans. The storm hit like a wall. Snow started fine and dry, then thickened into wet flakes that clung to my hood and froze in my beard. Wind howled through the spruce, bending them until they groaned. My GPS flickered, location hopping like a drunk trying to stand still. I pulled out my map, oriented myself by what little I could see, and decided to drop into a basin I'd marked earlier. The world shrank to 30 feet of visibility. Snow erased my tracks seconds after I made them. My gloves stiffened with ice. My thighs burned with the effort of pushing through drifts. Finally, I found a cluster of spruce thick enough to break the wind. I scraped a shallow pit in the snow, laid out my bivvy, crawled in with my boots on, and melted snow for coffee. The little stove hissed and popped. Steam curled upward, disappearing into the swirling flakes. I sipped the bitter heat, telling myself tomorrow would be clear. That night, the storm pressed harder. The wind roared like ocean surf, then dropped into eerie silence before punching in again. Snow hissed across the bivvy. I lay there, eyes open, feeling the cold trying to seep through the down, thinking about my son at home, about how I'd promise next time. At dawn, the world was white, no horizon, no sky, no ground, just white. I shook frost from the bivvy zipper and crawled out into the silence. My little camp was half buried. I brewed another cup of snow melt coffee, packed up, and told myself I'd work downhill, find clearer air, maybe spot the elk again. I tied a strip of orange tape to a spruce, my breadcrumb in case I had to backtrack, and started moving. By mid-morning, the snow was knee-deep. My breath steamed, freezing in my beard. Somewhere above, a deep, wooden crack echoed, the sound of stressed timber under too much weight. I stopped, scanning the slope. It was quiet again, that deceptive mountain quiet where you can hear the snow settle. I took a step, another, then it came, a splintering groan, the sound of something giving way under a burden it had carried too long. I looked up just in time to see the spruce start to fall. The top half of the spruce swung down in slow motion, crown first, shedding a sheet of snow like a white curtain. I tried to jump sideways, but my pack threw me off balance. The trunk scissored down along a line of hidden boulders, and in the time it takes to curse, my right arm was between that wood and rock. The hit was like a car crash. Shoulder wrenched, elbow jammed, wrist crushed against stone. Pain didn't build, it detonated. A white flash behind my eyes, a rush of heat that made my teeth hurt. I screamed, but the storm swallowed it whole. The tree settled, locking me in place. The snow absorbed every vibration as the weight bore down. I tried to yank free and nearly passed out from the surge of agony. My hand was pinned, glove flattened to nothing, skin and bone beneath screaming their protest. Even in that instant, I knew what was happening under there. Swelling, blood flow cut off, tissue already dying. Minutes mattered. My pack was still on my back. That was the only grace I had. I forced my left hand to work the straps one at a time, moving slow to avoid blacking out. Every shift made the trunk groan, a deep wooden threat. The second the pack was free, I dropped to my knees in the snow and spilled it open. Stove, food, gloves, med kit. The tourniquet was bright blue nylon, stiff from the cold. I'd carried it for years, thinking I'd never need it. I threaded it up my trapped arm with clumsy left-handed work, feeding it under my jacket until it was as high in my armpit as I could get it. When I twisted the windlass, the pain flared hot, then settled into a heavy throb. My heartbeat retreated from my hand into my neck. I tried digging around the trunk. Snow gave way, but the boulder under it was solid, immovable. The spruce was wedged tight, and every attempt to lever it up just tightened the trap. The truth was simple. The only way to get my arm out was to leave it behind. There's no dramatic moment where you decide to cut off part of yourself. It comes in waves, denial, bargaining, a dozen false starts. I told myself I'd try again to shift the trunk, braced my boot against a rock, pushed with all I had. Nothing. The knife on my belt was a 4-inch fixed blade, plain, ugly, reliable. I pulled it free, set the point to my jacket sleeve, and pressed until I felt the cold bite through to skin. Skin parts reluctantly in the cold. Thanks to the tourniquet, there was no gush of blood, just the drag of steel through fabric, flesh, and muscle fibers. Fat was pale, almost neat-looking. Muscle was dark, wet, stubborn with sinew. I worked by feel, my breath fogging the blade, my left hand clumsy and half numb. The cold was a thief, stealing dexterity, stealing courage. I talked to myself, nonsense, curses, bargains, anything to keep the animal part of my brain from panicking. Then I hit the first nerve. It was like touching a live wire with my soul. My jaw snapped shut hard enough I thought I'd cracked a tooth. My eyes blurred, my legs kicked involuntarily. I bit down on my collar and forced the knife deeper. Bone was next, smooth, unyielding. The knife wouldn't cut it. I needed leverage. I dug paracord from the pack, looped it below the cut, tied the other end to a low branch. Twisting my torso, I felt the joint strain. Bone doesn't snap like in movies. It grinds, then gives, the sound more felt than heard. When the radius and ulna parted, it was just finishing work. Tendons are tougher than you want them to be. I sawed until the last of me came free. My right arm dropped against the trunk, limp, fingers curled as if it still meant to hold something. For a second, all I could see was the stump, pale, ragged, the tourniquet biting purple into skin. My breath came in short bursts, steam mixing with the metallic tang of blood. I dug gauze from the med kit, wrapped it tight, added pressure bandages until the seep slowed, pulled a spare sock over the whole thing for insulation. I leaned back into the snow, dizzy, almost weightless. The tree was still there, the storm was still there, but I wasn't trapped anymore. Getting up was harder than the cut. My legs wanted to fold. My body screamed for sleep, but sleep here was death. I stuffed what I could into the pack. Stove, fuel, med kit, headlamp, orange signal panel. Left the rifle. I couldn't carry it one-handed through deep snow. The whistle went around my neck. Wind whipped snow into my face, but it had shifted direction, and I used that to orient myself. I kept the trees on my left, hoping downhill would lead toward the logging road I'd marked on my map. Every 20 steps, I stopped to breathe, checked the stump, tightened the tourniquet. The whistle blasts vanished into the storm. My world shrank to the tunnel of white ahead, my boots breaking crust, the steady hammer of my pulse in my skull. Once I broke through into hip-deep powder and almost didn't get up. The pack's weight dragged me sideways, snow filling my hood. I kicked and rolled until I was on my knees again, sucking air like a drowning man. Somewhere in that white void, the hallucinations started. My dad's workshop, the smell of sawdust, my son's laughter on a California beach we hadn't visited in a decade, a blue-painted door I couldn't walk through. I used those images like fuel. One more step, then another. I don't remember deciding to move again. One moment I was hunched in the snow, the stump pressed to my chest, and the next I was forcing my legs to break the trail downhill. The storm had shifted, but the air was still thick with snow. Every gust painting the trees in fresh white, erasing whatever hints of a path I thought I had. Time had gone strange. I couldn't tell if I'd been walking for minutes or hours. My body didn't feel like a single thing anymore. It was pieces stitched together, each with its own complaint. My left hand burned with cold inside my glove. My thighs cramped and shook. My lips were cracked open and bleeding. The stump was a distant, pulsing presence, as if it belonged to someone walking close behind me. I blew the whistle again. 3 short blasts, pause, 3 short blasts. The sound seemed to go nowhere. Snow eats sound in a way that makes you feel like you've been erased from the map. Somewhere in that monotony, the world began to tilt. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, too fast and too low to be human. I caught flashes, gray fur, a sweep of a tail, the faint crunch of paws on snow. Wolves. Or my brain making wolves because it needed something to fear besides stopping. I thought of the fire kit in my pack, but the idea of stopping long enough to make a fire seemed as dangerous as not having one. If I cooled down now, I might not start up again. The hallucinations shifted. My father appeared first. Not the old man he'd been, but in his prime, standing in the workshop with that look he had when he was explaining something he'd already explained twice. "Measure twice," he said, voice carrying over the storm as if it wasn't even there. I measured, I told him, or maybe just mouthed the words. "Then cut," he said, and smiled in a way that made me want to punch him and hug him at the same time. Then he was gone, and the trees filled the space. The next time it was my son. Not as he was when I'd left home, but younger, maybe 8 years old, in a bright red hoodie. He was standing on the trail ahead, hands in his pockets, like he'd been waiting all day. "You're late," he said. "I know," I said, and my voice cracked on the words. "You said we'd go together next time." I wanted to tell him everything, explain the weather, the tracks, the mistake of going further than I should have. But all that came out was, "I'm trying." He nodded, then turned and walked down the trail. I followed, boots dragging, lungs burning. The trail bent, opened into a small clearing, and he was gone. By the time I found shelter for the night, the light was dying fast. It wasn't much, just the lifted root plate of a blown-down spruce, enough to get me out of the direct wind. I dropped to my knees, shrugged off the pack, and began clawing at the snow under the roots to make a shallow pit. Fire was no longer optional. I dug out the pitch-covered twigs I gathered before the accident, shaved curls off a knot of heartwood with the knife, and cut my hands around the lighter until the flame caught. The pitch sputtered, smoked, then flared into a steady, ugly burn. I fed it smaller sticks, then wrist-thick wood, coaxing it until it held its own. The smell of burning pine pitch filled the little space, sharp and resinous. I melted snow in the cup, watching the water turn from ice to steam. I drank slowly, letting the warmth spread from my gut outward. My body wanted to sleep right there by the fire, but I knew the flames would die in the night, and the cold would take me before morning. I forced myself to tend the stump. The sock I'd pulled over the dressing was frozen stiff. I peeled it back carefully, fingers sticking to the ice crust. Blood had seeped through and frozen in dark patterns. I added fresh gauze, cinched it down, and tightened the tourniquet until my vision sparked. The pain was a living thing again, pacing just outside the firelight. Sleep came in fragments. 30 minutes here, 15 there, waking each time to feed the fire. The wind shifted during the night, bringing colder air, and each time I opened my eyes, I expected to see the wolves again. When the gray light of morning seeped in, I felt heavier than when I'd lain down. My legs didn't want to work, but I forced them, and the fire was dead, just a heap of coals under ash. I packed up, shouldered the bag, and stepped back into the storm. The hallucinations stayed with me that day. Sometimes they were people I knew. My mother, dead 20 years, humming in the kitchen as if I'd just come in from school. Sometimes they were strangers. A man in a yellow rain jacket standing in the snow. A girl with a braid down to her waist who didn't look up as I passed. I stopped questioning them. Real or not, they kept me moving. By late afternoon, the snow thinned. The wind eased to a steady push at my back. I broke out of the denser timber into what looked like an old cut. Maybe a power line corridor, maybe just a clearing from a long-ago log and run. It ran downhill in a lazy curve. Downhill meant hope. Downhill meant maybe a road. I followed it until the light began to fade, then built another fire in the lee of a snowdrift. I knew I was close to the edge of my endurance. My steps had gone mechanical. Lift, swing, plant without thought. The whistle hung cold against my chest, but I couldn't find the will to blow it any more. I slept in fits, waking to feed the fire, telling myself that if I could make it just one more day, I might see another human face. Morning came as a thin gray smear across the sky, the kind of light that didn't promise warmth. My fire was ash and a faint ribbon of smoke. My joints felt stiff, my body replaced with frozen wood. The stump was numb. Mercy or final warning. I forced myself upright, stamping my boots. My left hand was swollen in the glove. I shouldered the pack and stepped into yesterday's faint footprints. The air was calmer, snow drifting lazily, but the cold was unyielding. Downhill. That was all I thought. The clearing widened into a basin. For a moment, I saw it curl away like a frozen river. My breath steamed. No smoke, no road, no tracks but mine. I walked for hours, stopping to steady the world when it tilted. Once, I dropped to a knee without meaning to. I thought about my son, how he used to fall asleep on my chest, his hair smelling of grass and sun. That memory got me up again. Then, sound. At first wind, but too steady. Thub, thub, thub. Helicopter. I tore the orange signal panel from my pack, waving it overhead, fumbling for my whistle. 3 short blasts. Pause, 3 blasts. Until the metal stuck to my lips and tore away, tasting blood. The thudding grew louder. A white and red chopper appeared over the ridge, rotor wash blasting snow into the air. I waved harder, vision blurring with frozen tears. It banked, slowed, hovered. A figure in the open door pointed down. They'd seen me. The skids touched down 20 yards away. 2 figures in bright jackets ran toward me. One tightened my tourniquet, the other slipped an arm around me. Pain flared, but relief was stronger. They half carried me to the chopper. Inside, warmth hit me like a drug. I collapsed onto the bench as the medic secured the stump and wrapped me in a foil blanket. Through the window, my patch of snow shrank, my footprints already fading. "We've got you. Stay with me," the medic said. I nodded, eyes drifting shut. I focused on small things. Smell of jet fuel, floor vibrations, the medic's hand on my shoulder. We reached the hospital in under 40 minutes. Bright lights, blankets, heated fluids. Someone cut away the bandages. Someone else started an IV. A voice told me I was safe. After surgery and broth, I could barely taste. My son was there, both hands holding my one remaining hand. Pale, older in the eyes, but steady. We didn't speak for a long time. When I told him everything, he just said, "You came back." People think the headline is the amputation, but the real story is every step after. Every time I kept moving when stopping would have been easier. That's survival. Not one big choice, but hundreds of small ones. And if you're lucky, if you're stubborn, you live to tell it in a warm room to someone who needs to hear it.